Yo, what's up, guys? Raptors lose again to a top 10 team in the NBA, losing to the Minnesota Timberwolves 115-107, guys. Another frustrating loss tonight for the Toronto Raptors. A fourth loss in 5 games, guys. Another loss against a top 10 team in the NBA. The Raptors, I thought, played a really solid first half against the Minnesota Timberwolves tonight. Had a really solid about 5 to 6 minutes of the third quarter. And then Anthony Edwards had a showtime dunk, and then as we saw, the momentum changed. The game got out of hand for the Raptors. Minnesota got more physical on defense, and offense started pushing the fast break as we saw. And that was curtains for this ball game, guys. Raptors, like I said, solid first half. You're down by a point. RJ Barrett had a really solid first half with 14 points, leading the way for the Raptors in scoring. I liked what the Raptors did in the first quarter. Went on like a 10-0 run to start the game. But I knew as this game was progressing, Minnesota, they came back and responded of their own with their own runs. They went on like a 9-0 run, kept on responding. The Raptors tightened up defensively in the second quarter. They took the lead again. Then Minnesota tightened up again, went on another run. It was a really impressive effort by both the Raptors and the Timberwolves. The Raptors gave up the lead. Then they took the lead again. Minnesota took the lead at one point. The Raptors were able to get it back. So both teams were playing tight defensively at times in the first half. Some really good things offensively. Loved how the Raptors were moving the ball. Loved how RJ Barrett was, picking his moments to drive the lane, with the nice little floater. Had some three-pointers, shot 4 for 5 from 3 tonight. So really loved how RJ played in this game. And I thought Scottie and B.I. had a pretty decent first half. So I thought Jakob Poeltl had a solid first half. Really liked what I saw from the guys. Coach Darko was only taking off 3 guys off the bench. You saw Jonathan Mobile play for like 3 minutes for like the first half. Didn't play any in the second half until near the end of the game where the game was already over. But really liked what I saw with the offense. Defense obviously was a little bit flat at times. Did give up some backdoor cuts, some three-pointers. Of course, Minnesota's a great team. They have size and physicality as well with guys like Gobert and Randall and Naz Reid coming off the bench. So I knew it was going to be a tough task for the Raptors in this game, but being down by only 1 point at halftime, guys, 55-54, I thought the Raptors did a really good job staying in the game, even though they did have the lead at one point. They did blow it. Obviously, that was a bit frustrating. Raptors blowing multiple leads in this game. Would have been nice if they could have held on to this game, but unfortunately, we've seen the Raptors this year, and how hard they struggle against top 10 opponents in the NBA. Obviously, they break down defensively at times. They get flat on offense. Other teams get more physical with them, and that's what we saw in this second half. Things stayed tight, halfway through the third quarter, and then, like I said, that dunk by Edwards, which was absolutely spectacular on RJ Barrett. You just knew the momentum swung after that. Minnesota just locked it down defensively. Gobert had a block on Brandon Ingram. They really started to get the fans going. They started making some shots, easy drive-ins, straight lane drive-ins for the Timberwolves in this game. And then it blew up to 15 points. They went on like a 15-3 run or 16-2 run, something like that. And that's where the game was over. It took just one quarter for everything the Raptors did good in this game to completely blow up in their face. And as we know, guys, the fourth quarter was a write-off, basically. Minnesota had controlled the game in the fourth quarter. Raptors did try to push a little bit, especially RJ Barrett. But to no avail. Minnesota's a strong team, really solid team in the NBA. When you got a superstar like Ant Edwards, you got strong physical players like Gobert and Randall, like I mentioned. It's going to be tough for the Raptors to come back in games like this, when they can't shoot their way into coming back into games. Obviously their defense obviously suffers a little bit when they're not making their shots, because then they have to rush back on defense and other teams push on the fast break. And we obviously know that that's the Raptors game and that's the recipe for success. But we saw Minnesota do that tonight. We saw them do it last time they played us a month ago or so. So we know that the Raptors have the talent and they have some really solid pieces, but time in and time out again, Raptors this year have gone flat offensively. Can't get stops on defense. The lack of communication, getting beat on screen and rolls, giving up open shots. We've seen this shit time in and time out again, and it's starting to get really frustrating. You just know with the Raptors, when you see them playing a top 10 team in the NBA, you're like, okay, guaranteed out. Just write it and book it. That they're going to lose this game, or play valiant for a half and get blown out in the second half. We've seen that too many times. We saw it with the Knicks. The Knicks were smacking them up again. We see it tonight with Minnesota. Even though the Raptors played well at home against the Timberwolves, and Edwards dominated in the fourth quarter when they were here in Toronto. And then, they snapped their 21-game losing streak against us in Toronto here. And then tonight as well, you got some great efforts from Gobert and Edwards as well tonight, guys. So the Timberwolves, man, you had 6 guys in double figures, 4 or 5 guys in double figures tonight. You had Gobert with 18, 12, and 5. You had DiVincenzo with 16, 5, and 2. You had Edwards with 22, 4, and 3. And Edwards dislocated his finger, popped it back in himself. Just shows what kind of warrior he is. I love Anthony Edwards, by the way, guys. He's one of my favorite players in the NBA. I love his attitude, love his mindset. The guy's just an absolute dog. Minnesota have themselves a good one with this guy, man. What a player he is. Then you had Dosunmu with 13. Reed with 12, and then you had McDaniels, who didn't have a great game, with 8, and then you had Anderson with 4, Highland with 3. Highland, had a quiet game tonight. McDaniels had a quiet game tonight. So, listen, it was their starters doing most of the work tonight for Minnesota. They did a really good job tonight stagnating the Raptors at times. Scotty only had 16 on 7 of 12 shooting. B.I. had 14 and 5 rebounds on 5 of 16. Not a great night for B.I. He missed those 3 free throws as well. Some people think maybe it was because of his hand, his thumb. I don't know. Could be the case. B.I. has been dealing with an issue, of course. Even Colin Murray-Boyle's not playing again tonight due to that thumb issue of his. Really frustrating to say the least. Jakob had 9.7 rebounds on 4 or 5 shooting. It would have been nice if Jakob could have gone a little bit more involved offensively. When you got to go up against a guy like Gobert, it's going to be very difficult. Quickly had 18 points. He didn't score a bucket till like the 7th minute of the second quarter, so he really got it going after that on 6 of 10 shooting. So I didn't think he had a bad night at all. RJ Barrett was the best player for the Raptors tonight. 25 points, 30 minutes, 6 rebounds, 9 of 14 from the field. I think it was 4 or 5 from 3. Yep, so RJ was the best player tonight for the Raptors offensively. Loved what he did tonight, shot the ball well, drove the lane well. Really liked what I saw from RJ Barrett tonight. Solid game by him, even though it was in a losing affair. Mamu had 11 points on 5 of 8 shooting, and then here we go with the bench. Jacoby, 2 points. Shed, 2 points. Battle, 2 points. Grady had 6 because of garbage time, of course. And Trace Jackson-Davis had 2. That's what happens when you get no production from your bench, and then when your starters are obviously getting stagnated because of the solid defense the Timberwolves playing. You just knew it was a recipe for the Raptors tonight, guys. Just the record continues to be a big thing for this team against top teams in the NBA. It's like 4-18 against these type of teams, down the top 10 in the NBA, guys. It's really frustrating to say the least. Minnesota shot the ball well, 52% compared to our 49%. They shot 42% from 3. We shot 43, 67% from free throws. I despise that shit. Shooting only 67% from 3. Minnesota shot 78. Minnesota had 52 rebounds to our 44. We had 11 offensive rebounds compared to their 6, but it didn't really matter for the Timberwolves there, guys. Minnesota had 12 second chance opportunities. They had 15 fast break points to our 14, 25 points off turnovers compared to our 21. So Minnesota was able to take advantage of those turnovers. Even we were able to do that as well. We were able to draw 13 turnovers from Minnesota, but they drew 14 from us. So obviously it was a little bit even there. 5 blocks apiece, guys. Minnesota had 10 steals as well, so they were able to take advantage of that, get some steals as well in this game. And then that third quarter, like I mentioned, guys, holding us to 22 points. Our lowest of the game. We had 27 and 27 in the first and second, and then 31 in the fourth. So, like I said, that third quarter was the biggest reason why we lost this game tonight. One quarter completely flipped the game on its head. And like I said, guys, when the game gets more physical, the Raptors, tend to cower down a little bit, and these other teams here are able to dominate them, and it's getting really frustrating to say the least. I'm getting sick and tired of watching the Raptors, getting their asses handed to them against these top 10 teams in the NBA, when the game stays tight, like I mentioned, and then boom, just like that, a flick of wrist, the game is over. Like, it pisses me off. You got to play Dallas next. That should be a win, hopefully. Last time we played Dallas, we lost to them in Dallas, so hopefully, to God, we beat them this time. They're not a very good team this year. We've been taking advantage against the smaller teams, guys. The teams below 500, Raptors have a very good record against them. We obviously know where the disparity is, and that's in the top 10. If they don't win on Sunday night, man, that's going to be 5 or 6 games. Teams are creeping up on them. Philly's right there. Orlando's coming up. Atlanta, Charlotte, those teams are starting to play some really solid basketball. At least, top 5 is not guaranteed anymore because the Raptors have gone on this little bit of a slump, and then Boston. The rich just get richer. Adding Jason Tatum on Friday, like, incredible to me. Second in the East, 3 games back in the first. Now you're adding Tatum. Man, oh man. The Boston Celtics are just very lucky right now. You got some great players on that team. to find a way to carry them to this moment. Now you're getting Jason Tatum back. It's going to be tough for the Raptors, to stay in the top 5 spot. And to play Cleveland in the first round wouldn't be easy. And if the Raptors have to play in a play-in, the most ridiculous thing added in professional sports history, if you ask me. The NBA plan is the biggest joke in sports, if you ask me, guys. And if the Raptors have to participate in that bullshit, that nonsense, I'm not going to be very happy, to say the least, guys. But we'll love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this loss tonight for the Raptors. We'll see how they do on Sunday against the Mavericks. Let's like this video. Subscribe if you guys want to see more content. Go Raptors, go as always. Gonna see you guys on the next episode of Raptors Unfiltered. Ciao, guys.